Right now, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are struggling to find a job. Or maybe you're just tired of your boss taking credit of the report that you worked hard on. Whatever the case may be, a good starting point is figuring out what jobs are in demand for 2021. And I'm just going to give my top 5, but I do want to mention this quick interesting fact about jobs. The word boss actually originates from the Dutch word baas, which actually translates more formally into master. If you found that interesting at all, go ahead and hit that like button for me. So the first on the list that has grown tremendously and will continue to grow is a digital marketer or a marketing specialist. For better or worse, we live in a world where even a mundane company such as a paper company would end up needing a TikTok account and a Twitter account and an Instagram account. Why in the world a paper company would need a TikTok account? I don't know. Next thing you know, they're going to be making a TV show about a paper company, which I'm going to bet is probably going to fail. The point being is that there's a lot of companies out there, and social media is kind of at this critical point where companies feel the need to have a social media presence, but they aren't quite sure how that will directly translate to revenue or into increased sales. So what ends up happening is a lot of companies will pay top dollar for digital specialists or social media specialists because they're hoping that they will get some kind of marketing viral video. And on top of that, a lot of companies, especially medium to small size company, aren't even sure what to expect as far as average salary for social or digital marketing specialists. So how does one even become a digital marketing specialist? Well, probably the best way and easiest way is to basically just rip off other people's jokes and claim it as your own. Speaking of which, I do have this funny joke that I came up completely on my own. Graveyards must be very popular because everybody is just dying to get in. Make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for my comedy career. Just kidding, but do it for the financial advice. In all seriousness, if you are interested in becoming a digital marketing specialist, the most important part is going to be analytics. A lot of people tend to think that a social media manager is just somebody who posts pictures or can come up with some kind of creative content, but where it's actually headed to, and at least the long term and especially the higher paying jobs, they really heavily rely on analytics. Now that term may turn off a lot of people when they hear analytics. They think math or science and that it's going to be overly complicated, but the reality is it doesn't have to be overly complicated, and it's actually to everybody's benefit. You know, how do you determine that your posting skills are better than somebody else's? You know, it's not necessarily enough to just simply say I have 100 more likes than before I got hired here. You have to be able to show how those 100 more likes ended up translating to more sales, or at the very least you have to be able to defend yourself, because think about it this way: if someone has 100 less likes but only spent an hour on their post, yet you spent a whole entire week coming up with your post, planning the content and trying to increase engagement, and only resulted in 100 more likes, well, you think about the time, effort, and money spent paying you to come up with 100 more likes, maybe it's not necessarily worth it from the company's perspective. And I think the other important thing that a lot of people should consider when they're thinking about being a digital marketing specialist is that the job opportunity growth is only going to continue to be greater and greater, especially as people shift to work from home, and a lot of companies are even making a permanent shift to work from home. That only increases online presence and the importance of an online presence for different companies. Speaking of analytics, I think the whole entire analytic industry is going to continue to grow as well, so that would be the second opportunity, and that would include jobs like data analytics or data analyst or data scientists, as well as statisticians, or even logistical and operational type analysts as well. If you think about it, every company out there and every operation out there basically creates data, and that's only going to continue to grow as different operations grow. And so basically they just need somebody to basically quantify and analyze that data. You take something as mundane as HR and hiring operations, perhaps you can look at that data and figure out that a better initial survey to potential employees actually increases the retention of employees. So if you're interested in analytics, those are definitely jobs I would search for, or a business analyst would be another search term I definitely would hit. And here's an important point, especially when it comes to that hiring interview process. When you're in that interview process, one of the things you really want to hit on is how you have a good ability to aggregate data from different sources, different software, because a lot of companies out there are relying on multiple different surveys or sources. They're not necessarily having all their data just in Excel format or something like that. You know, they have an accounting software, they have an outdated accounting software that they're still kind of using for previous years. They're trying to implement a new accounting software. So there's all these different sources that you have to aggregate that information from. Another thing I would at least personally stress is your ability to aggregate data from sources that aren't necessarily electronic. So for example, having to review handwritten surveys or different things like that and inputting it into Excel, because once again, especially with like small to medium-sized companies, they don't have the ability or software available to them to to basically automate that process. So somebody, and typically it's going to be a data analyst, has to input that data themselves. Another important point, especially if you're interested in analytic type jobs, is to basically create dashboards or data visualizations that really make it easy for people to see things at a high level, kind of at a summary level, and then be able to drill down into those details as well. Because on the one hand, you can't focus on too many details because it's just not enough time. And at the same time, you can't have information be so summary that you don't necessarily have any kind of company strategy or directions from that information. And probably one of the best resources to learn those types of skills as far as data visualization and how to aggregate data is right here on YouTube. Now, the third industry I really wanted to mention that I'm kind of personally coming up with myself. So if you see it anywhere else out there, you know they stole it from me. So send them as much negative feedback as possible. Just kidding, don't necessarily do that. But basically, I have a strong suspicion that jobs like career counseling or job coaches are going to become more and more popular, or at least it's going to be a big opportunity for it, especially when you consider that a lot of people are getting laid off, or a lot of people have put off getting a new job because they didn't necessarily want to risk losing their job by trying to switch to a new job. So a lot of people are postponing that until 2021. So that need for people to have people kind of review over their resume is only going to be greater in 2021. And the other reason why I would keep an eye out for this job, or at least job industry, is because if you think about it, a lot more people are acclimated to having Zoom calls or Zoom meetings, or just meetings that aren't necessarily in person. So what that means to you is that you can have these virtual meetings and you don't necessarily have to pay for office space. You don't necessarily have to build clientele that way. All you have to do is have a better online presence. I kind of make the same comparison into like online diet coaches or online nutritionists. There are a lot of people that are specifically trained for that job. And when it was when it was in person, you could basically look out for their degree or look into their office, see if they're very qualified. But when it comes to online, for better or worse, it really just comes to who can grab people's attention the most. So I'm not necessarily advocating that people should lie and have this online presence where it's just completely made up. What I'm at least suggesting is that if it's something you are interested in and willing to put in the work in for, I think building an online presence in that industry is going to be key, especially because I think you're not necessarily going to see job postings for career counselors or career guidance or job coaches, but it is a good opportunity if you're kind of wanting to move into that self-employed industry. Now, the next job I wanted to mention, which is going to kind of lump in a few jobs actually into the whole entire industry, which is just IT. With everyone working from home, or that shift to work from home, I think everybody kind of viewed it, or a lot of people anyways, viewed it as a temporary measure. It was only going to happen for 2 to 3 months. So from a company's perspective, it wasn't necessarily worth investing heavily into that IT infrastructure, whether it be having formal training for IT, cybersecurity, different things like that, or increasing their server capacity. Those are things that weren't necessarily thought of. But since a lot of companies have moved to a permanent shift to work from home, then a lot of questions that weren't answered before have to be answered now, and that's going to be, increasing the IT labor. So things like cybersecurity training for people, it's one thing to have IT and cybersecurity when it comes to an actual commercial office space, but it's a lot different when it comes to multiple people working remotely, different internet providers, different computers. There's a lot of questions that have to be answered. Even mundane things that seem small, such as people taking work laptops home, seem kind of insignificant, but it can actually result in increased jobs. For example, like an IT office administrator, because if you think about it, who's going to manage all those laptops? Right now, everybody's probably still employed at the same company, but as turnover begins to increase, people start to leave for other jobs. Who's going to be in charge of making sure that the company recoups that laptop? Somebody actually has to be in charge of that, because it's guaranteed to be people that either for better or worse are going to try to keep that laptop home. I think as well, IT cybersecurity is going to be more and more relevant, because think about a commercial office space where you have to manage that property versus now you have people that have laptops at home that may have compromising information. Well, if that person had somebody break into their house and stole that laptop, that's, an actual company issue, versus before the company just worried about their own commercial office space. But now you're having to worry about basically every single person's house, because that's employed anyways with you, because if any of their work laptops get stolen, then that's something that IT has to care about. So here are a couple of recommendations if you are interested in getting an IT job. One would be to focus on cybersecurity, because I think that's going to be a specific industry that's going to become more and more increasingly important and even more complicated as well. I do think it's a pretty safe bet to say that small and medium-sized companies aren't necessarily going to try to tackle IT cybersecurity themselves, so they're going to outsource that to national companies that have software capabilities to do that for them. So if you're looking for a job in IT security, I would definitely look at those national companies first. The other thing I would recommend, especially if you're looking into working for a specific company, especially if it's a small or medium-sized company, is to basically make sure you have multiple skill sets. Because the reality is, just like most jobs out there, you're going to end up tasked with more and more things that kind of are outside of your job description. And that's going to be more important with IT. You think about someone having to manage servers and manage online capability, and then as well as IT security, and then also manage the actual hardware inventory management. These are all things that most likely a small company is going to just be able to pay one person to do. And all of this actually kind of brings me to my last category that I wanted to hit, which is this general category I'm calling hybrid jobs. There are kind of two main reasons why I think this is going to become more and more popular, but basically job categories that kind of flow into different things. So maybe you kind of work in HR, but you need to fulfill an accounting role as well. Or maybe you end up working as a salesman, but you're also kind of their social media manager as well. So kind of getting into the two main reasons why I think these hybrid jobs are going to be more and more relevant is because if you think about that shift from a brick and mortar store to online, that just makes it prime for the company to kind of really reevaluate who needs to fulfill certain roles. And on top of that, there's going to be new opportunities such as generating a social media presence that they're going to want, but they can't necessarily hire somebody yet for that. So what's likely to happen is the company is just going to send out an email out there and basically ask if anybody's willing to fulfill this job role, and then that job role expands and expands until basically you're fulfilling two different jobs. The second reason that I think hybrid jobs are going to become more and more commonplace is just overall, I think that we're either going to have an economic slowdown or some form of recession, or at least even in local areas, there'll be local recessions. And as a result of that, companies are going to be looking to save money. And one way to do that is basically have one person take on two different roles. And this brings me to another overall point I want to make, which is I don't think companies are going to be willingly paying people extra for these hybrid type roles. So for example, you have to be proactive in that negotiation process. If a company is offering you $50,000 for an HR job, but you have this suspicion and kind of throughout the discussion, you feel that you're going to be fulfilling other roles like IT roles or social media type roles, you can basically say, well, I would be willing to accept $50,000 for the HR job, but I think I should be paid an additional $10,000 for this, social media job. And that's saving the company money because you're not having to pay two different roles. You're not paying HR $50,000 and $30,000 for social media. You're only paying me $10,000 extra. And that may be a way to basically negotiate and make sure you're getting paid what you're worth. So that's it as far as jobs that I think are going to be in demand for 2021. And if you think that there are other jobs that are going to be in demand for 2021 that you want to mention, go ahead and feel free to comment down below. If you appreciate this video, please give it a like. I'd appreciate it a lot. And if you like personal finance, business, or economics, or topics revolving around those, please hit that subscribe button. I hope to see you in the next one.